This is the Launch Station, the only place you need to look for all things onboarding, implementation, and customer success. Tune in for insights from industry experts every week.
Hey everyone, welcome to a new episode of the Launch Station. Today we're going to talk about something we absolutely hate dealing with, customer escalations. But here's the twist. Our guests for today are going to focus on not just how to handle them, but also how to turn them into opportunities. So that's our topic for today, looking at escalations as opportunities. We have a slightly different format for today. We have two guests, Mike and Rachel, both from Mitek Systems. Mike leads the global customer success and support organizations at Mitek, and he's a seasoned leader with over a decade in SaaS customer success with some of the biggest brands around the globe like Oracle and Kaleidus Cloud. He has a unique perspective on escalations being opportunities, and today he'll share more about his playbook and some of his strategies. On the other hand, Rachel has worked with some of the largest brands in North America and APAC, spent over 8 years in customer success. She is currently at Mitek and is working with customers utilizing identity verification as a way to combat fraud and also onboard customers seamlessly. She'll bring the perspective of how Mike's strategies translate practically when she puts them to use and what she's learned practicing the function over the years. Welcome to the show, Mike and Rachel.
Thank you for having
Sri.
us.
So, before we dive into the core topic, we'd love for our listeners to get to know something more about you. So, maybe we can learn about your superpowers at work. And since we have two of you today, maybe Rachel can give us what she feels Mike's superpower is and vice versa. We'll start with you, Rachel.
Okay, so for many folks listening, they may not know, but Mike was a philosophy major in college, and he has been able to take this skill and this learning and apply it to the corporate world. And he has this superpower or ability to come into any meeting or any call and really not even have the background or the context if he needs it. He just knows what questions to ask and is able to essentially ask, what's the purpose of this call? What are we here for? And truly understand either the issue or the goal within the first 5 seconds of being in a meeting. And I think it's great because it simplifies why we're all together and how we're going to move forward. And I think it's a really important skill to have in the corporate world.
Let me dive into Rachel's superpower, and this is probably no surprise. When you're looking at any employee or any colleague and why they're effective, it really comes down to three things, right? It's their attitude, it's the preparation, and it's the effort. And I would say those three things are what makes Rachel stand apart from anyone else. She has a great attitude. Her preparation goes beyond anyone that I've seen. And then the effort, just ties everything together. So those three things are her superpower. And, we can unpack into why that's the case. Those are the three things that stand out about her.
Perfect. That was fun to hear from both of you. Now, let's start at a high level. Mike, there's an obvious negative connotation with the word escalation. How much do you agree? Do you actually look forward to these events?
I don't necessarily root for escalations, but there's certainly a negative connotation to escalations, and maybe for a good reason, right? When we hear about an escalation, a customer is unhappy, the product's not performing, or whatever the case is, and it's one step closer to churn. And I think that's the reason why you have this negative connotation. But the reality is that escalations are going to happen, and you need to separate the emotion of an escalation from what's really going on, right? What are the facts? What's the customer experiencing? How can we help? And then you can point them in the right direction. And then what if I told you that a customer escalation could be one step closer to retention and expansion versus one step closer to churn? I think that would be surprising when you first hear it, but once you dig into it, and we'll do that today, hopefully it makes sense to you why I think that way.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think one thing after working in software for as long as I have, escalations are just part of working at a software company. And if I reflect back, I think escalations come with this internal panic and uncoordinated actions that I think trying to fix the issue fast is everyone's goal. And sometimes a lot of folks aren't asking the right questions. Sometimes there's no plan when it comes to an escalation. And if there is a plan, it's not very targeted. And so what we're really trying to focus on is trying to actually get a good plan in place and trying to execute it well instead of letting it be so reactive. And that's what Mike and I are definitely trying to do, is look at escalations more as opportunities to have a positive outcome. And something that Mike's taught me in working at Mitek is going into an escalation, asking myself, how do we get to a better place after this escalation? And that's really the mentality that you should have, any CSM should have.
Rachel, I actually heard you say in a better place than before. Wow. Feels like a lot of us need to develop a sort of growth mindset towards these escalations and learn about new ways to look at them. I'm going to come back to this in a while. But first, a question on escalations that happen the other way around. Rachel, I'm quite sure often your own implementation teams may be on the other side escalating things. Like a client sits on an open item for days and that disrupts your projections for your project. Do you advise escalations in such scenarios?
Yeah, absolutely. So in this case, I've seen this a lot. We have a customer that's come on board. They're implementing our products. We have a project that that has a timeline. I would say if that project is somehow stalled or not moving, I'd say absolutely to raise the flag internally. And the reason being is that sometimes we've found when there's a stall, it could indicate that there's a bigger issue at hand. And really trying to understand, why that is and how it impacts us as a business and the project and basically the overall relationship. So I think it's incredibly crucial to have, in this case, a relationship with the customer, but more importantly, and we'll get into this more, a champion over on the customer side. Maybe even an executive sponsor if we're lucky to have both of those who we can engage and coordinate with. Having a champion allows us, or it has allowed me actually, to just get in front of this person that I have a relationship with and have an honest conversation and, get everything out on the table, the good, the bad, the ugly, the risks maybe. And the thing that I've found and learned from, unfortunately, is that if you don't have that honest conversation with that person you can talk to over on the customer side, you can speculate and guess why the project's stalling. And I think if you start raising this internally and you really don't understand the real reason of something stalling, you're not really informing your stakeholders, internal teams properly. So I think it's really important to understand the true issue and then definitely raise the flag internally.
So yes, establishing an early relationship with the champion and putting that work upfront can go a long way in helping us in the bad times. Mike and Rachel, how do you identify a champion? And how could having a champion help at the time of escalation?
Yeah, I could take that one or take the first stab at it. So when I think of champions, first I want to define it. So I think of someone at a customer that can advocate for you. And it's not just one champion. It's great to have an executive champion or a project champion or both, right? And so they can advocate for you, but maybe even more importantly, they can provide you with information. So that you're not speculating, as Rachel said, right? You're not speculating what's going on. What are they thinking? Why is this stalled? And I've always had these champions at customers where you can get information, and perhaps it's back channel information, right? If you're a good CSM, you have a text message relationship with your contact, and it takes a while to get there. You can't just ask for it. You got to provide value, but once you get there, then you're able to get a lot of information quickly. Everyone's always on their phone. Emails can be ignored. Text messages are harder to ignore. And, that contact wants to help you. So, just to kind of sum it up, there are different levels of champions that can serve different purposes. But, at the end of the day, being able to get that information from your champion when you need it is super helpful.
Yeah, and I can tag on to that a little bit. We actually have a fantastic marketing program at Mitek. Where we actually focus on different personas and different types of champions that we want to have. And we actually invite them to be part of our thought leadership. And we have an innovator program where it just allows these folks to come to the table and meet our other customers and actually start being part of the Mitek community. And it's great for us, but it's also really great for that person and their resume and being an expert in their space. So really trying to drive and find out what's important to them and then playing into that. And then of course the basics is just, being honest and real and authentic with that contact is going a long way too, in creating a great relationship on the customer side too. So.
Okay, that's some great input on nurturing the relationship with your project champions. So, Mike, I would expect the size of the customer also to be a factor everywhere. I mean, these are the folks you probably invite to your forums and programs, but also the escalations, I'm guessing, would be bigger and more serious for these big ticket customers. Is there a difference in how you think about handling these versus, handling the smaller customer escalations, or like high priority versus low priority customers?
Yeah, there certainly is. So I think it all comes back to at any company, a bigger customer that pays you more tends to get more attention. And so escalations become bigger, at least emotionally bigger. I would say, and if you asked any CSM, they would probably tell you uh, smaller customers tend to need more attention because well, a lot of reasons. One, they don't have the resources potentially, right, to make your product successful. The other is, maybe they are new to using this type of product. The bigger companies are well resourced, and internally, everyone at the vendor, everyone knows who that customer is. They know their use case, they know their journey because it's been talked about a lot, right? So in a lot of ways, yes, a bigger customer is a bigger escalation, but I would say it's an easier escalation in a lot of ways. So Rachel has firsthand experience in this, so it'd be great to hear from her about her experience beyond just my high level what I think.
Yeah, it's actually something it's an ongoing thing that I'm working on because it's escalations in general. When you're first working at a software company, all escalations are the same to anybody who's kind of new to the space. So now really defining a different playbook for these bigger customers versus these smaller customers is something that I'm still kind of working through on as a CSM. But to Mike's point, I do agree that big customer escalations can be easier. They do suck a lot out of you emotionally and physically because it is such a heightened emotional thing that we're going through, and there's a lot of risk involved. If something is really bad, then there's a potential that this big customer who's paying us a lot of money could leave. And so that's definitely not why it's easier, but having that all hands on deck approach that most companies take, where everyone on any given team, depending on what the problem is going to drop what they're doing to help this top customer. And that just makes it so much easier for the CSM because we can't handle these escalations on our own. We need subject matter experts. We need cloud ops and developers to help with issues. And so if we have that mentality of people are going to drop what they're doing for the biggest customer, which I've seen at every company I've been at, it makes the escalation a lot easier to get through. So with a smaller customer, it's hard because I was trying to think of the word, but I really do feel like a CSM kind of has to claw and fight internally to get eyes to look at this $30,000 customer and really care about the problem that they're experiencing. And so I think one thing that I'm starting to realize when I have a small customer raise an escalation is there data that I can compile that would show that maybe this is an issue for another customer? Maybe it's happening with all customers, and maybe the small customer is the first one to find it. So that's one thing I'm noticing is getting more attention from a smaller customer side is finding out what the true issue is and if it's impacting others. Because if I can showcase that this is happening across other customers as well, I'm going to get quicker help and a faster resolution from the various teams internally. And if there's not a growing trend, then it allows me to go back to the customer and say, what's happening? Something's maybe changed. Maybe it's something directed and siloed only to this customer. And then it kind of helps us all figure out how to establish next steps with that customer if we know that it's just impacting them. It might be an implementation issue. And then I can probably bring in the right folks from my side to potentially help if I know more what the actual issue is.
I guess the onus is then on you to put in that extra work to show how it all adds up across customers.
Yeah, it is. And we also have some data folks as well. That's one thing at Mitek that I'm really happy that Mike has kind of looked out into the future to figure out what we need as CSMs. We have a data team that's been really helpful, and analysts that can actually help me look at the data to see if there's anomalies or trends or things like that. So the ownership does fall on me a little bit, but I've also been able to leverage teams who are willing to help, which they are. Mitek's great about that. So
I think that's really smart because usually you're looking for that data and it can be hard. You need to chase different people, go figure out how to get your hands on that data. But having a dedicated data team, that can really help you get the information you need to make your case. That's very smart. So do you have a playbook of sorts that your team has internalized as to how to handle escalations and also how to minimize the impact?
yeah, we have one documented now. I'd say over the last couple of years, every CSM on our team and probably previous, we've all had our own iterations of how we handle escalations. But we've actually taken a stab, and this was Mike's idea, to actually get a playbook in place. And there'll probably be iterations. It's not final. It's always going to be a working document and changing. But I'd say the most prominent step in any handbook or playbook for a customer escalation is really identifying what the issue is first, and documenting that really well, how it's impacting the customer. And that can be hard, right? I know from a CSM perspective, I've got a customer yelling at me on a call and screaming about, how this is, impacting their business, and they're threatening to walk, they're threatening to go to a competitor, and that the project's failing. And, I've talked about this with Mike over the last few years, and it's really just external noise. You have to strip away the emotion from what you're feeling and what the customer's feeling to really get to the issue. And understanding that we know this is a big deal. We know that it's impacting your business, but really understanding the root technically, like what's technically happening and how it's impacting the user experience, I think is going to help me define my next steps internally. And I can't focus on all the emotion that's going on around me or the other CSMs when that happens. If I can get those steps defined, then I can move on to internally who I need to brief on my side and whose role is what. Like, what are they doing? Who do I need? And I want to be mindful of their time and also manage their internal emotions. So this was another thing that, Mike's been pushing us to do, and it's been really helpful, is having a centralized location. That's another piece to this playbook is, and probably document this playbook is document all the meetings, all the dates, all the key players at the customers, the risks, what's actually happening. And then that will allow me to say, okay, this is so-and-so's job. This is when we need it by. This is what we're communicating to the customer. And then in turn, it's going to allow, our CEO or CTO, if they want to go in and take a look at this playbook in the centralized location, they can, and they can stay up to speed. And it should be a living, breathing document that we're constantly updating as things happen. And I think the key component here is having that CSM drive all of this. We need to steer everyone on the vendor side or on the Mitek side. We need to steer everyone into this escalation and not be reactive and not take a backseat. We have to inform everyone, because at the end of the day, I know the most about my customer. I should be telling everyone what's happening, and definitely take direction for sure. But we certainly should be, I hate the term quarterbacking, but that's what it is. We should be quarterbacking it and giving our team direction on what should be done and how to handle these sorts of things.
The challenges are, like you said, just the threat of them going to a customer, going to a competitor, right? Of course, they're going to mention, now we're looking at this company, or we're going to leave, or this or that, right? And the way I think of that is they should be doing that. That is their job, right? If we're failing them, they should be looking at competitors. They should be looking at the contract. How can they get out of it, right? It's not like I'm encouraging them to do it, but that's a normal course of action on their side. I don't, have any bad feelings towards them, but it's also irrelevant when it comes to fixing the issue. Whether or not they're looking at the contract has nothing to do with us fixing the issue. right? And addressing the issue. The other piece is just communication. Internally, everyone wants to know this is being taken care of, and they don't want to have to ask. And so this goes back to the CSM driving it and having a central place where you can sign up to watch this page. So if there are updates, I get an alert in my email, right, that says there's an update. And there have been many times when we've had an escalation and someone wants to be briefed. I don't have to set aside 30 minutes. Rachel doesn't have to set aside 30 minutes to brief this person, then brief this next person. You point them to that page. It has a summary of the issue. They can get up to speed, and now they can watch that page and get alerts moving forward, right? So that's the internal communication, and then external communication needs to be, more often than you think, right? Probably daily, maybe it's twice a day, whatever you agree on with the customer, but you have to be able to offer up more than you think they need, just so that they know that things are happening, right? It could be a 5-minute sync twice a day, just something that they need, and you need agreement externally, internally with what's going to happen, who's going to be doing what, and so on.
All right. I was actually going to lead into a question about communication, but you read my mind and answered it already. I've actually seen that communication could be a major cause of stress on the CSM, and that in turn, gets passed on the rest of the team, especially with customers who keep asking, "Hey, do you have an update?" And I wonder if you also have strategies to handle some of your largest customers who expect you to be on an open bridge with them till you sort out the problem, and maybe you have no idea when that's going to happen.
Yeah, like an open communication with us, so that they can ping us, whether it's Slack or a phone number or whatever the case is. Yeah, I think that's important, and it needs to be one person, the CSM. It cannot be they have access to your engineer, they have access to, and I've seen that in contracts, right? During a P1, we have access to your engineers and your cloud ops. No, everything comes through the CSM. We'll respond quickly, but we need to be able to organize on our side. So I think that's a fair ask. Part of it is optics, right? They feel good having that. Does it really help? Potentially. But I think one of the first things that we do, or I was doing when I was a CSM, is if I get an escalation like this from a customer, I hit the champion up via text and say, "Is this a big issue? This person's yelling at me, but is this really an issue?" And sometimes they'll say, "Yeah, it actually is, and this is what you need to do to fix it," or "No, this is not really a big issue." So it helps me size it, right? And that's that back channel information I'm talking about.
Makes sense. Rachel, how do you see these escalations molding your team? Are there both positive and negative impacts? Are there two sides to this?
Yeah, I mean, I really do think there's more positive than negative to an escalation. I do think, reflecting back on some of my hardest escalations, they kind of steal a piece of you each time you have an escalation, because any CSM they really care about their customer and they want them to be successful. And so something like an escalation can really negatively impact the mentality of the CSM if they let it. And so I'd say trying to pull yourself out of that negative mindset, which can be exhausting and sometimes frustrating. I mean, there's really no way around it, but I'd say on the other side, whether the outcome with the customer is good or bad, I do think that every CSM, myself included, we grow so much from these escalations that it's not that I encourage it, but every time an escalation comes up, I'm like, yeah, I want a challenge. Let's try and solve this, and let's try and prove to this customer yet again why we're a good partner and why this relationship's going to work. I feel like every customer that I've been through an escalation with, sometimes like the relationship actually gets better afterwards. Like we have war wounds that we can share. And I was joking with Mike about trauma bonds, where we've kind of been through this traumatic experience together, and now we can move forward and we can get through this and we can get through anything. And so I think it's important to see the positive there and the potential growth that I've made personally as a CSM, but also I've made with my customer. And I think the rest of our team sees that too. One of our other CSMs is going through a really intense escalation, and it's an ongoing escalation. It's not a quick fix that we were able to implement. And I just see so much growth in her from being able to manage this escalation end to end. And I think she's going to come out and like fantastic. She's already fantastic, but she's going to be even better after this escalation. So I think there's just more positive than negative.
I've successfully brainwashed Rachel. So now I think it's, when we talk about opportunity, I know we're going to get to this, but I didn't think about this, but there's an internal opportunity as well, right? A CSM that's never been through an escalation has a ceiling. And once you've gone through escalations, and you're just a better CSM. So I would say that's an opportunity to get better as well internally.
Yeah, I agree. It gives you an extra bit of confidence to handle stuff once you've been through it. I've seen that once you're through these lows and you manage to come out of it, then you know that you can handle the hard situations. Now, I want to go back to what you were talking about earlier, about seeing escalations as an opportunity. And Mike, you just mentioned the internal opportunity, but you also kind of talked about expansion and loyalty. How is that even possible with someone that just escalated?
Yeah, Rachel touched on this when she was talking about my superpower of asking questions. So, I kind of see escalations and orchestration tied together. So, what is an orchestration? So an orchestration is the ability to work with your customer and say, set certain milestones. When this happens, we're going to do a case study. When this happens, you're going to expand. When we're successful with this product, we'll look at this other feature, right? That's orchestrating with the customer. You can do the same thing in an escalation. It sounds a little nutty or counterintuitive, but would you really ask a customer in the middle of an escalation to be a reference, right? Would you really ask a customer in the middle of escalation for, can I get introduced to this other line of business, right? For potential expansion? Or do you want to be a identity innovator, part of our program? The answer is obviously going to be no. And, most customers or the individual I talk to, they're kind of taken aback, but not offended that you asked, just kind of a weird ask at the time, right? So the response that you'll get is, no, not at this time, but, let's get through this escalation and then let's talk. So now I have this point in time where I know if I get through this escalation, I can call this person and say, okay, now, we got through it. We're back where we're supposed to be. Let's talk about you being a reference. Let's talk about you introducing me to this new line of business. Let's talk about this, right? So it's a nice way to take that escalation and orchestrate this event in the future once you hit this milestone, which is getting through the escalation. So that's how I view them. I never go into an escalation thinking a customer is going to leave us. And part of that is because of the team we have, right? Someone like Rachel on an escalation, I'm not worried about that customer leaving. I know we'll get through it. It's just a matter of how long it'll take. And so, that's why I feel good about escalations and how they'll, what the results will be, what the outcomes will be from the escalation.
Perfect. So Rachel, is this all wishful thinking from Mike? How does this actually play out at the ground level?
It's funny that you asked that, because the first escalation that I went through at Mitek, I felt so incredibly nervous when Mike's like, we're going to ask so-and-so to be part of our innovator series. When they were in the middle of an escalation, we drove up to LA to visit a customer that was really unhappy with how their implementation and launch went. And I was like, Mike, we cannot ask them to be part of our reference and innovator group right now. They're threatening to walk. And he's like, no, it'll work out. And so like, it's successfully brainwashing, I guess, because it is kind of like, you have to shift the mentality of like, you can't be scared going into an escalation. You have to be confident that we're going to get through it. And when we get through to the other side, we're going to grow. And that growth can happen in a variety of ways. I've seen it where a customer's been a reference, or they've been an innovator with us. They've done events with us. They've also grown. They've created new use cases because they've seen the success of fixing whatever escalation they had, and they now have confidence to expand and grow their business with us. And so I've seen it. And I think if you go back to the basics, you really have to be super transparent and honest with the customer. And you have to have the willingness that they're going to work with you on this escalation. I have to be very, while I'm being transparent, I have to be very honest and say, I need your guys' help here, here, and here. And that becomes the partnership with the customer. And it's more than likely going to grow into something greater and present more opportunities down the road if we can kind of create this rhythm with the customer in these types of escalations. And then, one of the things that is slightly controversial, but I'll say it anyway, is if we find that we're in escalations all the time with the same customer and we haven't found the champion, or we've gone through all these playbook exercises and nothing is really sticking, and they're just constantly unhappy and love to remind us of why we stink as a vendor, I think it's fine to say this customer isn't a good fit. And I think knowing that there's growth and knowing that this customer is a lost cause and throwing in the towel is something that I think we're willing to do, because I tell Mike this all the time. I have bigger fish to fry. We have a lot of customers that really do want to grow and want to partner with us. So we should really focus on working with them rather than trying to save this kind of high maintenance customer that's not willing to be a good partner.
Nice. And we're going to move to the next section of the show. These are questions from our audience, either on Twitter or from our Rocket Lane Slack community. Here's the first one. Is it okay to use the good cop, bad cop technique along with CSMs and bring in your product managers during an escalation?
Yes, we do that all the time. Yeah, I think that I've used that in a lot of scenarios with customers, and sometimes it's sales, sometimes it's product. Sometimes I use Mike as my director to come in and say no to a customer and be the bad cop, because at the end of the day, I'm fine with pushing back on my customer, but in some cases you really need to have that no or that firm yes coming from someone else so that you can kind of maintain your business as usual and not deviate from the relationship that you have as a CSM. So I'm in full support of good cop, bad cop.
I would agree. I think it's the funny thing about working with customers is it's just working with people, and you have so much in common. And a lot of times saying no, they would say no if they were in your position, and I would ask if I was in their position. And once you can agree on that, then things become easier, right? And it's just people working together that have different perspectives but can understand each other's side very easily.
Perfect. Here's the second question. How do you handle an escalation when we don't have a definite timeline for the fix?
Yeah, I think that goes back to what Mike was talking about, where we have as much communication back and forth with the customer as possible. I've actually been through something recently where we actually don't really know what the problem is, and we don't know what the timeline is for that fix because we don't actually know what the issue is. So I think it goes back to being transparent with the customer and setting the right expectations up front and saying, I don't know what it is. I'm going to continue to communicate and be proactive in that communication. But I think in the past, I've gotten caught where I try and overpromise without really knowing what is the issue and how long it's going to take. And then the customer ends up being ultimately disappointed. So setting those proper expectations up front. It's challenging. It's not always an easy conversation, but as CSMs, we can't do it all. So I think just managing that engagement and expectation is probably my first step.
Yeah, and promising turns into overpromising, right? You don't set out to overpromise. You think a release is going to have a fix and it's going to solve the problem. And I think what we've learned is that, in software, releases can be unpredictable. They can solve a majority of the problem, but they're not a silver bullet, right? So I think setting that expectation, saying, here's the release, here's the test results. In production, it might be a little different. We're going to monitor it. But that's what I know now, right? But then going back to your original question, if I don't have a date, then I just need to tell the customer, your job is not to save the customer as a CSM. Your job is to communicate the truth and the facts, right? So if I don't have a date, I don't have a date. And they may be upset because we don't have a date and they can't plan, but I'm not going to make up a date, right? And they don't want me to either. So it is the best thing you can do is just communicate the truth. And that is your role.
Yeah, I must agree. Here's the last question from Twitter. Individual ownership versus group ownership while taking responsibilities during an escalation. How should it be?
This goes back to probably the playbook that we have is, I think as a CSM, a lot falls on our shoulders. And I'm okay with that. I'm fine with having the tough conversations. But I think it's definitely important to delegate as necessary. And that's where the playbook comes into play. I know my job as a CSM is to keep the customer informed and coordinate. But I also think having a place where we can document the issue at hand or whatever is going on with the customer, maybe it's a release, maybe it's a launch of some sort, and communicating internally through that central repository. This is who I need. This is what I need from you. When can you provide it to me? And just basically staying organized and making sure that the folks that you need are aware. Maybe you have to call a meeting to do that, but documenting it and delegating and making sure that they're aware that you need their help and them committing to helping you. I think you have to have that as being a CSM. And again, you can't do it all. So leveraging internal teams is definitely necessary.
That's a great answer, Rachel. We now come to our last section, which is a fun rapid fire section. Here we go. You can answer with the first thing that comes to your mind when you hear this. First one for Mike. A CS metric that you live by.
NPS response rate. I know NPS is much hated. It's been around for a while. I love it. It's great for our business. The response rate shows engagement. So I care very little about the score itself. I care a lot about the response rate. Can we get a customer to submit a survey where there's one question, right? And the answer needs to be yes. So, and a response rate needs to be close to 90%.
Rachel, what would your answer be?
I like that one, but I'd say probably customer engagement. And what I mean by that is, and I think it varies for different tech companies and SaaS companies that CSMs may work for, but really defining what the customer engagement model should look like upfront and making sure that you have a touch point or a cadence with the customer and that they're showing up and they're engaging really tells me the health of that customer and maybe how I should be switching it up or changing my approach depending on their level of engagement.
Here's a second one. What are some resources that you find handy to keep up with the latest in customer success, like podcasts, digital publications, or like following some thought leaders, etc.?
A lot of this has actually come from Mike. He's really good about finding the newest and the latest in the CS world. I've been listening to Strike Deck Radio podcast quite a bit in the recent months. Mike also introduced something to me, Gain, Grow, and Retain, GGR podcast. I was listening to that last week. And then I'm also a big workshop person. I really like to get in and talk and actually do different exercises in CS. So we've taken a couple of workshops from Lincoln Murphy and Paul Henderson that I've found to be really beneficial from kind of a foundational standpoint of, building my skills as a CSM. They've given me a lot of great advice and just food for thought when I've done their workshops. And so I'm always kind of on the lookout to find the next, leader in the CS space to do a workshop with.
Yeah, I would echo all those. I think those podcasts are great. On LinkedIn, there's a lot of great posts, right? If you're following certain thought leaders. I also like to look outside of customer success. So I feel like we're just in this bubble of looking at customer success. I like to see how do other organizations or groups or industries do things, right? If you were to go look at like a top restaurant, how do they run it? How do they prepare before the meal service? What do they do? If you're going to produce a video game, I have a friend that works at Zynga. What does it take to produce a video game? Like, what does that look like? How does he bring the team together? Right. So just seeing that and getting outside of this customer success bubble actually helps you in your customer success role, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I guess often great ideas can come from elsewhere, and you can just borrow one notion from somewhere and you have a great idea in your domain. So yeah, completely understand where you're coming from there. Now the next question. What is one book or movie that inspired you recently? Mike, you want to go first?
Yeah, I'll go first. I always liked Moneyball because Moneyball is the story of Billy Beane, and he was a failed baseball player, top pick, and he became a GM, general manager for the Oakland A's, and he just looked at things differently. Baseball is a 100-year-old sport, 100 plus, and things are always done a certain way. And he used data, and he used just a different perspective to do things differently and better, right? And so it's just a nice reminder of how you should approach certain things. You shouldn't just be stuck in what's been done over the years, right? You need to look at things differently. So that's always a movie that I like to watch.
I haven't seen that, Mike. I'll have to watch it. I'm definitely now curious. For me, Mike knows this about me too, and my husband always shakes his head because he'll walk into the living room. I always have Disney movies on, and I know now as an adult why I appreciate them so much, because the stories are always they're simple, but they have so much heart and good intentions, and I feel like the main character is always fighting for what they believe in. And one of my favorites is Coco. I watched it recently, and I've seen it several times now, but it inspired me because the young boy Miguel, if you guys have seen it, I'm sure most people have, he knows in his heart that he's supposed to be a musician, and he cannot not think about it and want to drive to be a musician, but his family won't let him listen to music, and they don't want him to be part of the musician world, and he doesn't care. He continues to fight. And so somehow, just in general, that plays back to me in my CSM world, and trusting my gut and fighting for what I believe in. And just, it's a good message just in life. And I think even though it's silly, everyone should fight for what they believe in and follow their dreams.
I think the love for Pixar movies is probably something we share then, Rachel. My favorite is Ratatouille, for this whole idea of, a good idea or a good cook can come from anywhere. Interesting option that you chose there. Now, we have a couple of questions, but we're going to change it up a bit. Mike, I'd like you to ask one question of Rachel.
Yes, finally got her in the hot seat. My question to Rachel would be, what would be your tip for someone that is just starting off in their career in customer success, and or in a role as a CSM, and they're not really feeling it? So maybe the first one, and then I can expand on that second one. I know you said one question, Sri.
So your first question was they're new to CS.
Yeah. What tips would you have for them?
There's probably a few. If I can think back, I always got so defeated if I didn't do something correctly, or if I didn't know the answer to something. And I would say for anyone, not just CS folks, to be okay with messing up and to learn from your experience. And for those who tell you that it's not okay to mess up, or that you did a poor job, and it could be true, maybe you did do a poor job, but the point is that you should really take into this as a learning opportunity to get better, and people become great by messing up.
So there are different types of ways to define customer success. There are different types of ways to run an org, a customer success org, right? It's fairly new. It's probably 15 years old as a function. And you've been in different CS roles. So have I. I've been in CS roles where I've had to count how many QBRs I have, right? And that was a metric. To me, it just seems silly that was a metric. So what advice would you have for CSMs that are, not happy in their role and they want to find something, but they don't know what they're looking for? Like, what would you tell them they should look for in a CS org?
I think there's probably a twofold there. I would say definitely find someone either in your org or even outside of your org that you could use potentially as a mentor, or someone that you can confide in and speak to freely about how you're feeling. And hopefully they're older and have been in the business longer, that they could potentially guide you through solving the issue that you're up against, either personally or professionally. And then I would also say having an honest conversation with yourself about why you're feeling the way that you're feeling. And this is something that's also taken me a while that I'm still working through, is if I'm upset or if I'm frustrated or if I'm feeling unmotivated to do my job, there's usually an underlying reason. It's not just because I'm having a day or whatever. There's usually something at the core that's bothering me. And so having that honest conversation, I like to journal and document it out about how I'm feeling. And then, from there, hopefully have some steps of maybe it's looking for a new job, or maybe it's, something that a project that I've really been wanting to work on, but I've been scared to take it to my manager, or maybe it's, maybe moving to a different company where I would still be in CS, but maybe I'm just not being challenged. So I think just having that honest conversation with myself is step one. And then I could plan next steps accordingly.
Rachel, now it's your turn to put Mike on the spot now.
I know I've got some loaded questions. No, I'm actually going to be fairly easy, because something I was thinking of when you were asking me the questions that you asked, Mike, is what do you think your favorite part is about customer success? Like, why do you think that you've continued to stay in this space? Like, what makes you happy?
Yeah, that's an easy one, because I think about that often. And I think we all think about fulfillment in our jobs often, right? And the thing that I'll remember about being in customer success are definitely the leading of an org, leading of a team, and helping individuals with their career, right? Whether it's advancement or whatever the case is, that's what I really like. And it could be any function. I just happen to like customer success because I like working with customers. It came naturally to me. It was the first thing that I had ever done that actually came naturally to me in the work environment, and that felt good. But I come from a sports background, and I really like the team part of sports. I played basketball growing up, and leading a team and trying to create that chemistry across a team is just something that I enjoy. And so that's why I come to work every day, and that's what I get out of customer success that I really like, is just leading the team and impacting people's careers.
Okay, I had one last question, but then Mike stole it and asked it as a question for Rachel. So I think we'll bring this show to an end. Thank you so much for your time today, Mike and Rachel. It was great chatting with you, and I hope our listeners have acquired this new lens to look at escalations going forward.
Thank you, Shri. Really enjoyed it.
Shri.
Great chat.
Awesome. Thank you.